Somewhere beneath the surface of a warm, ancient sea, a whale the size of a school bus is dying. It never saw what hit it. One moment it was gliding through blue water, sunlight rippling across its back. The next, a shadow rose from below a shadow so large that for a heartbeat the whale's entire world went dark. Then came the pressure. Then, the sound. A single, catastrophic bite that could crush bone the way you would snap a dry branch, delivered by jaws wide enough to swallow a person whole and never notice. This was not a sea monster from a story. This was real. It hunted the oceans of our planet for more than 15 million years. It was the largest predatory shark that has ever lived, and quite possibly the most powerful marine hunter in the history of life on Earth. We call it Megalodon. And for the last 3.5 million years, scientists have told us the same thing. It is gone. Extinct, a ghost we know only from its teeth. But tonight, we're going to ask a different question. A dangerous question. What if that isn't the whole story? What if the largest predator the oceans ever produced had never disappeared at all? What would our world look like, and would we even be safe to enter the water? Stay with me, because to understand what its survival would mean, you first have to understand exactly what this creature was. And the truth is far stranger and far more terrifying than any legend. Let's begin with a confession, because honesty is the only thing that separates real science from a good campfire story. Almost everything we know about Megalodon, we've reconstructed from fragments. We have never found a complete skeleton. We have never seen its full body preserved in stone. And there is a simple, unsettling reason for that. Sharks are not built like us. They have no true bones. Their skeletons are made almost entirely of cartilage, the same flexible material that shapes the tip of your nose and the rim of your ears. Cartilage is light, it is fast, it is perfect for a life spent chasing prey through open water. But it has one great weakness. When a shark dies and sinks to the seafloor, that cartilage rots away, dissolving into the mud and the dark, leaving almost nothing behind. So across millions of years, the greatest predator the seas ever knew mostly vanished without a trace. Mostly, but not entirely. Because there was one part of Megalodon that refused to disappear. Its teeth. A shark's teeth are coated in a mineral so hard and so dense that they can survive for millions of years, waiting patiently in ancient seabeds and riverbeds until, one day, someone stumbles across them. And when people first began finding the teeth of Megalodon, they had no idea what they were looking at. In medieval Europe, these massive triangular stones were called tongue stones. People genuinely believed they were the petrified tongues of dragons or serpents, and they wore them as charms to protect against poison. They had found the remains of a real monster and mistaken it for a fairy tale. It wasn't until the 17th century that a brilliant Danish scientist named Nicholas Steno dissected the head of a large shark and made a connection that would change everything. Those tongue stones, he realized, weren't tongues at all. They were teeth. The teeth of an animal so enormous that the very idea of it must have seemed impossible. And here is where the scale of this creature starts to sink in. Because a great white shark, the animal that stars in our modern nightmares, the shark that made an entire generation afraid of the ocean, has teeth that reach maybe 2 inches long. Impressive, deadly, the teeth of Megalodon could reach more than 7 inches in slant height. Hold your hand up and spread your fingers as wide as they'll go. That's roughly one tooth. And Megalodon had rows of them, hundreds of them, lining jaws that could open wider than a doorway. The name itself tells you what the first scientists thought when they saw them. Megalodon, it comes from ancient Greek, and it means, quite simply, big tooth. It is one of the great understatements in the history of science. From these teeth, and from a handful of preserved vertebrae, the disc-shaped bones of the spine, which sometimes fossilize because they contain a little more mineral, paleontologists have spent over a century trying to rebuild a monster. It's like being handed a single fang and a few chips of bone, and being asked to reconstruct an entire animal you have never seen and never will. And yet, from these scraps, a portrait has slowly emerged. A portrait of something that should not have been able to exist. But it did. For 15 million years, it did. The formal name we use today is Otodus megalodon, though for a long time it was grouped alongside the great white and called Carcharodon, and its exact place on the shark family tree is still debated by experts. That debate matters, because it changes how we picture the living animal. But whatever we call it, and however we classify it, one fact remains carved into every tooth we've ever recovered. This was not a scaled-up great white. It was something else. Something on a scale the oceans have not seen before or since. And to truly grasp what its return would mean, we have to answer the first and most obvious question. Just how big was it, really? The anatomy of a titan size is where the legend of Megalodon becomes complicated, because size is exactly the thing we can't measure directly. We don't have the body. We have the teeth. So scientists do something clever, and a little bit haunting. They compare the teeth of Megalodon to the teeth of living sharks, measure the relationship between a modern shark's tooth size and its total body length, and then scale that relationship upward. It's detective work performed across the gulf of millions of years. And when they run those numbers, the results are staggering. The most careful, most widely accepted estimates suggest that Megalodon commonly reached lengths of around 15 to 18 meters. That's roughly 50 to 60 feet. Some of the largest individuals may have pushed toward 20 meters, though those upper figures are more debated and rest on thinner evidence. But let's sit with the conservative number for a moment. 50 to 60 feet. That is longer than a semi-truck with its trailer. That is the length of a bowling lane, and then some. That is an animal you could not fit inside most people's homes. Now compare that to the great white, the apex predator that rules our oceans today. A truly large great white might reach 20 feet on a very good day. Megalodon dwarfed it. If a modern great white swam alongside a full-grown megalodon, it would look like a pilot fish trailing a whale. It would look like prey. But length only tells you part of the story. The real horror is in the mass. Estimates for the weight of a large megalodon range enormously, but many fall somewhere between 50 and 70 metric tons, with some calculations reaching even higher. Try to picture that. That is heavier than 10 adult elephants. That is more than the weight of a fully loaded city bus, moving through the water not with the lumbering slowness of something so heavy, but with the fluid, silent grace of a shark. Because that's the truly unsettling part. This was not a slow, plodding giant. This was a giant that could accelerate. Let's build the animal from the teeth outward. Its jaws, when fully open, are estimated to have spanned somewhere in the region of 9 to 10 feet across and just as tall, a gaping cavern of flesh and cartilage lined with more than 250 serrated teeth arranged in multiple rows. And those serrations matter. If you ran your finger along the edge of a megalodon tooth carefully, you'd feel tiny ridges, like the blade of a steak knife. Those serrations weren't for tearing soft fish. They were engineered by millions of years of evolution for one specific and gruesome purpose: cutting through the thick blubber and the heavy bone of large marine mammals. Behind those jaws, we imagine a head that was broad, blunt, and heavily muscled, a battering ram of a skull built to absorb the shock of impact. Then, the body, torpedo-shaped, powerful, tapering back toward a tail fin that, in the largest individuals, may have stood taller than a grown man. Every line of this animal, every proportion we can reasonably reconstruct, points toward the same design brief: power, endurance, the ability to catch and kill the biggest prey in the ocean. And then there's the bite. This is the number that stops people cold. Scientists have attempted to model the bite force of Megalodon using computer reconstructions of the shark's jaw muscles, and the figures they've produced are almost difficult to believe. Some estimates place the bite force of a large megalodon at well over 100,000 newtons, with the upper models suggesting a force that may have exceeded the crushing power of any animal that has ever lived, land or sea. To put that in human terms, This was a bite capable of pulverizing the ribcage of a whale. It could crack bone. It could sever the spine of an animal larger than a bus. There was no armor in the ocean that could withstand it. Now, I want to be careful and honest here, because this is exactly the kind of place where documentaries start to exaggerate. These bite force figures are estimates. They come from models and reconstructions, not from a living animal in a laboratory. The real number could be somewhat lower or somewhat higher, but even the most conservative estimates describe a bite unlike anything in the modern world. Even taking the cautious view, Megalodon possessed one of the most devastating bites in the entire fossil record. So we have our animal. 60 feet of muscle, 70 tons of predator, jaws that could swallow a person and teeth the size of your hand. But a body, no matter how terrifying, is just potential. And there is one more piece of this creature we haven't yet examined, a piece you cannot see in any tooth or any bone. The senses. Because the most frightening thing about a predator is not its size, it's how it finds you. Every shark alive today is, in a sense, a swimming sensory instrument, and there is no reason to believe Megalodon was any different. If anything, it was likely even more refined. To understand how it hunted, you have to understand that this animal did not rely on eyesight the way we do. It hunted with an entire arsenal of senses, most of which we don't even possess. Start with smell. A shark can detect blood and other chemical traces in the water at astonishingly low concentrations, carried on currents from great distances away. To a hunter like Megalodon, the ocean was not a silent blue emptiness. It was a landscape of scent. A wounded whale, a struggling seal, a trace of blood from a fight miles away could all register as a beacon, drawing the predator steadily toward its next meal. Long before it ever saw its prey, it would have smelled it. Then there is sound and vibration. Sharks are exquisitely sensitive to low-frequency vibrations in the water, the kind produced by a struggling animal, a splashing body, the irregular thrashing of something wounded or panicked. To Megalodon, the distress of a dying whale would have carried through the water like a dinner bell, pulling it in from beyond the edge of sight. And then comes the sense that has no equivalent in the human body at all. Sharks possess special organs, tiny jelly-filled pores clustered around the snout, that can detect the faint electrical fields given off by the muscles and nerves of every living creature. Every heartbeat, every twitch of a muscle produces a minuscule electrical signal in the water. And a shark can feel it. This means that in the final moment of an attack, even in murky water or total darkness, Megalodon did not need to see its prey. It could sense the living electricity of a beating heart and strike with lethal precision. Imagine that for a moment. A predator that could feel the beat of your heart through the water and home in on it. There is no hiding from a hunter like that. There is no going still and hoping it passes. It knows you are alive because it can feel the very life inside you. Put all of this together, and you begin to understand what it would have meant to share an ocean with Megalodon. It could smell you from miles away. It could feel your movement through the water. And in the end, it could sense the electric pulse of your own heartbeat. By the time you ever laid eyes on it, the hunt would already be over. What made Megalodon truly the stuff of nightmares then was not simply what it was. It was what it could do, and what it could do began long before you ever knew it was there. Here is a question that changes the entire picture. What does an animal this large actually eat? Because a predator of Megalodon's size has a problem. It needs an enormous amount of food to fuel that colossal body, and small fish simply won't cut it. Chasing sardines to feed a 70-ton frame would be like trying to fill a swimming pool 1 teaspoon at a time. It would starve. So Megalodon didn't hunt small things. Megalodon hunted the largest animals in the sea. It hunted whales. We know this. This is not speculation. This is one of the rare cases where the fossil record hands us something close to a crime scene. Paleontologists have recovered the fossilized bones of ancient whales' ribs, vertebrae, flippers, and gouged deep into that bone are the unmistakable marks of Megalodon teeth. Long parallel grooves. Puncture wounds. In some specimens, a tooth even broke off and remained embedded in the whale's bone, a fragment of the predator left behind at the scene of the kill. These fossils are the closest thing we will ever have to security footage of a megalodon attack, frozen for millions of years. And when scientists study those bite marks carefully, they can begin to reconstruct not just what Megalodon ate, but how it killed. And the picture that emerges is chillingly intelligent. You might imagine a monster this size simply charging in and biting whatever it could reach. But the evidence suggests something far more calculated. Some bite marks appear on the flippers and the tail regions of whales' limbs. And that tells a story. It suggests that Megalodon may have targeted a whale's mobility first, crippling its ability to swim before delivering the killing blow. Disable the engine, then finish the fight. That is not the behavior of a mindless eating machine. That is strategy. Now let's think about the great white shark, because it gives us a living model for how this kind of hunting works. When a great white attacks a seal, it often strikes from directly below and behind, exploding upward out of the darkness at tremendous speed. The seal, swimming near the surface, is silhouetted against the bright sky above and cannot see the danger rising beneath it. By the time it senses anything, it's already too late. That first strike is designed to be catastrophic, to deliver so much damage in a single bite that the fight is over before it begins. Now scale that ambush up. Take that same explosive rise from the depth strategy, and instead of a shark the length of a car, imagine it performed by an animal the length of a bus, weighing 70 tons, rising toward a whale that never learned to fear the deep water below it. The great white's ambush is terrifying. Megalodons would have been apocalyptic. The sheer momentum of a 60-foot predator accelerating upward through the water column, jaws opening to their full 10-foot span, striking the underside of a whale, the impact alone might have broken bones before a single tooth touched flesh. And here's a detail that makes it worse. Speed. Based on studies of the shark's likely body shape and the metabolism it would have needed to sustain that body, some researchers believe Megalodon may have been capable of significant bursts of speed, not the sustained cruising of a sluggish giant, but explosive acceleration when it mattered. When it came time to strike, this animal could move. Picture the sequence now, in real time. A pod of whales, migrating through warm coastal waters, singing to one another across the blue. Below them, in the darker water where the sunlight fades, something is watching. It has been shadowing the pod for some time, patient, unhurried. It selects a target, perhaps a young whale, or one swimming slightly apart from the group. And then, with a single sweep of a tail taller than a man, it begins its ascent. The whales sense nothing. The water is calm. The sun is bright. And then the sea erupts. 10 feet of jaws close around a whale's body with a force that crushes bone into fragments, and the whole pod scatters in blind panic as the water blooms red around them. That was not a rare event. That was a Tuesday. For 15 million years, this was simply how the ocean worked. Megalodon sat at the very top of the food chain, the apex above every other apex, and nothing, absolutely nothing, hunted it. In the entire history of our planet, that is a rare and terrible distinction. To be a predator so complete that no other creature poses a threat to you. To rule an entire ocean without a rival. But even a ruler needs a kingdom. And Megalodon's kingdom looked very different from the world we know. To understand Megalodon, you have to travel back to a version of Earth you would barely recognize. Megalodon rose to power during an epoch called the Miocene, beginning roughly 23 million years ago, and it survived into the Pliocene that followed. This was long after the dinosaurs had vanished. Megalodon and Tyrannosaurus never shared a world, no matter what the movies suggest, but it was still a deeply alien time. Tens of millions of years before the first humans would ever walk the Earth. The oceans of the Miocene were warmer than ours. Sea levels were higher. Vast, shallow, sun-warmed seas spread across regions that are dry land today. And those warm, rich waters were absolutely teeming with life, in particular, with marine mammals. This was the golden age of the whale. The seas were full of them, in a dazzling variety of shapes and sizes, primitive baleen whales, toothed whales, early relatives of dolphins, along with seals, sea cows, and giant sea turtles. It was, in short, a buffet. An ocean overflowing with exactly the kind of large, blubber-rich prey that a 70-ton predator needed to survive. This is the crucial connection, and it will matter enormously later in our story. Megalodon and the great whales rose together. The abundance of marine mammals is almost certainly what made a predator the size of Megalodon possible in the first place. You cannot have a 60-foot hunter without a steady supply of enormous prey to feed it. The monster and its meals were bound together, two halves of the same warm, thriving world. And Megalodon spread across that world with astonishing success. We found its teeth on nearly every continent in North America and South America, across Europe and Africa, in Asia and Australia. From what were once shallow coastal seas to deeper offshore waters, this shark was everywhere the water was warm and the food was plentiful. This was not some rare, isolated creature clinging to a single stretch of coastline. This was a globally dominant superpredator, ruling oceans across the entire planet at the same time. Its reign was not local, it was total. Try to picture what it would have been like to stand on a Miocene shoreline if there had been anyone to stand there. Warm water lapping at a beach that hasn't been named yet. In a world with no cities, no ships, no fishermen, just endless blue horizon. And beneath that peaceful surface, in the shallows and the depths alike, cruise the largest predatory sharks the planet has ever produced. Generation after generation. For a span of time so vast it defeats the imagination. Megalodon didn't rule the ocean for 1,000 years, or 10,000. It ruled for millions. Empires rise and fall in centuries. Megalodon's empire lasted longer than the entire history of the primate lineage that would eventually give rise to us. And through all of that immense time, this creature had to be born, grow, learn to hunt, and reach its terrifying full size. Because no animal, not even a monster, begins its life as a giant. Even Megalodon started small. And that beginning holds one of the most surprising and revealing chapters in its entire story. There's an image the word Megalodon conjures instantly the fully grown adult, 60 feet of muscle and menace. But that adult was once a pup. And where and how those pups grew up tells us something profound about this animal, something that makes it feel less like a mythical monster and more like a living, breathing creature with a life story of its own. Sharks, unlike many fish, tend to produce a small number of large, well-developed young rather than millions of tiny eggs scattered to the currents. And based on what we know of related sharks, a newborn megalodon would not have been small in any ordinary sense. Even at birth, a megalodon pup may have been around 2 meters long, the size of a full-grown adult human, or larger. Let that sink in. The baby was already bigger than you. And yet, in the world it was born into, even that was dangerously small. Because the ocean of the Miocene was full of predators, and a young megalodon before it reached the untouchable size of adulthood was vulnerable. So how did they survive that dangerous childhood? The fossil evidence points to a remarkable answer. Nurseries, in certain locations around the world, including sites in what is now Panama and along the coast of Florida, paleontologists have discovered concentrations of small, juvenile megalodon teeth. Not the massive 7-inch daggers of the adults, but smaller teeth, clustered together in shallow, warm coastal waters. And that pattern suggests something extraordinary. It suggests that Megalodon may have used protected nursery areas, sheltered shallows where the young could grow up in relative safety, away from the deeper waters where larger predators roamed. Warm, food-rich, protected lagoons and coastlines that functioned as nurseries for the next generation of ocean rulers. Think about what that means. It means these animals had a strategy for raising their young. It means the survival of the species depended not just on the raw power of the adults, but on these fragile, hidden coastal cradles where the future of the entire lineage grew up in the shallows. A young megalodon would spend its early years there, hunting smaller prey, growing steadily, learning the rhythms of the sea. And then, as it grew too large for the nursery, it would move out into deeper water, taking on bigger and bigger prey, until finally it claimed its place at the summit of the food chain, a place no other creature could challenge. But hold on to this idea of the nursery, because it hides a vulnerability. A creature that depends on specific, shallow, warm coastal areas to raise its young is a creature with a weakness. If those coastlines change, if the water cools, if the sea levels shift, if the prey moves away, those nurseries could fail. And a species that cannot successfully raise its young is a species with a countdown already ticking. Which brings us, at last, to the great mystery at the heart of this entire story. Because this was not some fragile, marginal animal that barely clung to existence. This was the most powerful predator in the ocean, the undisputed ruler of the seas for over 15 million years. An animal with no natural enemies, spread across the entire globe, sitting atop the food chain of an entire planet. And then, it vanished. So the question that has haunted scientists for generations, and the question we have to answer before we can even imagine its survival, is brutally simple. What could possibly kill a king? Around 3.5 million years ago, in the Pliocene epoch, Megalodon disappeared from the fossil record. After more than 15 million years of absolute dominance, the largest predatory shark in the history of the world was simply gone. No sudden asteroid, no single cataclysm, just a slow fading from the stone, until the teeth stop appearing and the ocean falls silent of its greatest hunter. For a long time, this was one of paleontology's great riddles. How does the apex predator of an entire planet go extinct? The animal that nothing could kill, killed by what? And the honest answer is that we still don't know for certain. There is no single confirmed cause. But over decades of research, scientists have assembled a list of suspects, and the most likely story is not a single dramatic blow, but a slow suffocation from several directions at once. A perfect storm unfolding over millions of years. Let's begin with the cold. During the late Miocene and into the Pliocene, the Earth's climate was shifting. The planet was cooling. Massive ice sheets were building up at the poles, locking away enormous volumes of water and causing sea levels to fall. And this is where Megalodon's design became its curse. Remember, this was a warm water animal. Its entire empire was built on the warm, shallow, tropical, and subtropical seas that once spread across the globe. As the oceans cooled and those warm shallows shrank, the very habitat Megalodon depended on began to disappear beneath its fins. The kingdom was shrinking, and a giant that needs vast, warm, food-rich seas cannot follow the warmth into ever smaller and smaller refuges without paying a terrible price. Worse still, remember those nurseries, those shallow, warm coastal cradles where the young grew up in safety. As sea levels dropped and coastlines changed, many of those crucial nursery habitats may have been lost or disrupted. And a predator that cannot raise its young is a predator on borrowed time. The countdown we spoke of earlier had begun. But cold water alone doesn't fully explain it. The second, and perhaps most important, suspect is hunger. Remember the deep connection between Megalodon and the whales. Megalodon existed because the seas were overflowing with large marine mammals to eat. But as the climate shifted and ocean conditions changed, the world of the whales was changing too. Many of the smaller and mid-sized whale species that had thrived in the warm Miocene seas began to decline and disappear. The Great Buffet was closing. The very foundation of Megalodon's food supply was crumbling beneath it. And for an animal that needed to consume vast quantities of large prey simply to survive, a shrinking food supply is a death sentence. You cannot fuel a 70-ton body on an empty ocean. And then comes the third suspect: competition. Because as Megalodon's world was cooling and its food was thinning, new predators were rising to fill the seas. The great white shark, smaller, faster, more adaptable, more efficient, was spreading and thriving. And crucially, a new kind of hunter was emerging, the ancestors of the modern killer whale. Orcas, intelligent, social predators that hunted in coordinated packs, capable of taking down large prey through teamwork and cunning rather than through raw individual size. Think about the contrast. Megalodon was a lone titan, a specialist built to dominate a warm, whale-rich world through sheer, overwhelming power. But when that world began to fail, its very design became a liability. It was too big. It needed too much food. It was tied to warm water and large prey. Meanwhile, smaller, smarter, more flexible predators could adapt. They could hunt a wider range of prey. They could survive in cooler waters, they could work together, and they may well have competed with young megalodons for the same shrinking supply of food or even preyed upon megalodon pups in their vulnerable nurseries. So picture the final act of this drama, playing out across the immense stage of geological time. The oceans grow colder, the warm shallows retreat. The whales that sustained an empire grow scarce. And into the shrinking, cooling seas move faster, smarter, hungrier rivals. The Great King finds its kingdom collapsing on every side at once. Too cold, too empty, too crowded with competitors. Its enormous size, once the source of its invincibility, becomes a chain around its neck. It needs more than the world can now provide. And so, slowly, generation by generation, over a span of time longer than all of recorded human history combined, the greatest predator the oceans ever produced faded into extinction. Not with a roar, but with a silence. The teeth stop appearing in the rock. And the ocean, for the first time in over 15 million years, no longer holds a monster of that magnitude. That's the real story. It's less dramatic than an asteroid, but in a way it's more haunting. Megalodon wasn't destroyed by a single enemy. It was undone by a changing world that simply no longer had room for something so large. And that raises the question we've been building toward this entire time. That single, electrifying what if. What if it hadn't happened? What if, somehow, Megalodon had survived? What would our world look like today, and what would it mean for us? What if it survived? Now, we come to it. The question that brought you here. And before we go a single step further, I need to be completely honest with you. Because you deserve the truth and not a fantasy dressed up as fact. Megalodon is extinct. There is no credible scientific evidence, none, that it survives anywhere in our oceans today. You may have seen documentaries or videos that suggested otherwise, that hinted this creature might still be lurking in some unexplored trench. Those claims are not real. Some of them were deliberately staged fiction that fooled a lot of people. So let's be clear from the outset. What follows is not a claim that Megalodon is out there. It is a thought experiment. A serious, science-grounded exploration of one question. If this animal had somehow endured, what would that actually mean? Because the honest answer is far more interesting than the myth. Let's start by demolishing the most popular version of the myth, the idea that Megalodon could be hiding in the deep sea, in the crushing black depths of trenches like the Mariana, waiting undiscovered. It's a seductive image. The ocean is vast, we've explored so little of it, surely a monster could hide down there. Right? Wrong. And the reasons why are rooted in everything we just learned about this animal. Megalodon was a warm water hunter of the sunlit surface and shallow coastal seas. It was built to chase whales through warm, productive waters near the surface, not to lurk in the freezing, lightless, food-poor abyss. The deep ocean is bitterly cold, almost entirely dark. And critically, it does not contain anywhere near enough large prey to sustain a population of 70-ton predators. There are no whale herds cruising the bottom of the Mariana Trench for Megalodon to eat. An animal that needs to consume enormous quantities of large marine mammals cannot survive in a place with almost nothing large to hunt. The deep sea isn't a hiding place for Megalodon. For an animal like this, it's a starvation zone. And there's a second problem, even more decisive. Megalodon was not subtle. This was the largest predatory shark that ever lived, an animal that hunted at the surface, in coastal waters, all around the world. If a breeding population of 60-foot super predators still existed, we would know. They would leave evidence everywhere. Fresh teeth washing up on beaches, not million-year-old fossils, but new ones. Massive, distinctive bite marks on whales and other large sea life. Sightings by the countless ships, fishermen, divers, and satellites that now cover our oceans. An animal that size, hunting in the places Megalodon hunted, cannot hide from a planet of 8 billion people with cameras and sonar. Its absence from all of that evidence isn't a mystery. It's the proof. The silence is the answer. So Megalodon is gone. And it is gone for real. But now let's imagine as a genuine exercise that history had unfolded differently. That the climate hadn't cooled so severely. That the whale populations hadn't collapsed. That somehow, the warm, prey-rich world Megalodon depended on had persisted, and the great shark had survived into the present day alongside us. What would that world look like? First, and most obviously, it would utterly transform our relationship with the ocean. Consider how much fear a great white shark inspires an animal 20 feet long at its largest. Now place into the same waters a predator 3 times that length and many times that weight, an animal that hunts prey the size of whales. The entire human relationship with the sea would change. Coastal fishing as we know it, recreational swimming and surfing near the shore, small boat travel, all of it would carry a risk that simply doesn't exist in our world. Not because Megalodon would hunt humans specifically. We're far too small to be worth its effort. More of an accidental snack than a meal. But an accidental encounter with an animal that powerful would be no less deadly for being accidental. Entire stretches of coastline might be effectively off limits. Second, the whales as we know them might never have flourished into the giants we celebrate today. Here's a fascinating scientific idea to sit with. The blue whale, the largest animal that has ever existed. Larger even than any dinosaur, evolved to its truly colossal size relatively recently, after Megalodon was gone. And some scientists have wondered whether that's a coincidence. It's possible that with the great predator removed from the equation, whales were freed to evolve to sizes that would have been far too dangerous, far too slow, and far too vulnerable in a world still ruled by Megalodon. In other words, the largest animal on Earth today may exist, in part because the largest predator went extinct. If Megalodon had survived, our oceans might contain no blue whales at all. The gentle giants we treasure could owe their very existence to the death of the monster. Third, the entire structure of the marine food web would be different. Every ecosystem is a balance, and an apex predator shapes everything below it. In our world, the great white and the orca sit near the top of the ocean's hierarchy. In a world with Megalodon, they would be middleweights at best, forced into a smaller role beneath the true ruler. The populations of seals, dolphins, and smaller whales would be shaped by the hunting pressure of a predator far more powerful than anything they face today. The ocean would be organized around a different king, and every creature within it would live by different rules. Fourth, consider what it would have meant for the story of humanity itself. So much of human history is a story of the sea. We spread across the globe in boats. We built empires on trade routes that crossed open water. We fed entire civilizations from the ocean's bounty. Now imagine attempting all of that in a world where every coastal shallow and every open crossing might hold a predator capable of destroying a small vessel outright. Early seafaring, the fragile rafts and reed boats and wooden hulls that carried our ancestors across the water would have been an act of almost suicidal courage. Whole chapters of human expansion might never have been written. It's entirely possible that a world with Megalodon in it would be a world where humanity clung far more tightly to the land, and the great age of ocean exploration that shaped our modern civilization would have looked completely different, if it happened at all. The shadow beneath the waves wouldn't just have reshaped the ocean, it might have reshaped us. And yet here is the twist for all of that terror: Megalodon would almost certainly not view a human as prey. We are simply too small, too bony, too insignificant to interest an animal that hunts creatures the size of whales. To Megalodon, a human being would be barely a mouthful, not worth the energy of a proper hunt. The danger would come not from being targeted, but from the sheer, indifferent power of the thing. A single investigative bite from an animal that size, delivered out of nothing more than curiosity, would be catastrophic. That's what makes the idea so unsettling. You wouldn't be hunted. You'd simply be in the wrong place, at the wrong moment, in the path of something that barely registered you at all. But here is the deepest and most sobering point of all, and it's the one the fossil record itself teaches us. Megalodon didn't survive precisely because the world it needed no longer existed. Its extinction wasn't an accident or a stroke of bad luck. It was the logical outcome of a planet that changed in ways that left no room for a giant. For Megalodon to have survived to the present day, our entire world, its climate, its oceans, its whales, its very temperature would have had to remain frozen in a warmer, richer past. And a world like that would be a fundamentally different Earth than the one we know. The truth is that Megalodon and the modern world may be mutually exclusive. You can have one or the other, but perhaps not both. Which leaves us with a strange and humbling thought. We are, in a sense, living in the world that Megalodon's extinction made possible. The oceans we swim in, the whales we watch, the balance of life beneath the waves, all of it took the shape it has, in part, because the great king fell. Its absence is written into the very structure of the sea. We didn't inherit an ocean that Megalodon left behind. We inherited an ocean that could only exist once Megalodon was gone. So, where does that leave us? With a creature that is undeniably, permanently gone, and yet somehow more present in our imagination than almost any animal that still lives. There's a reason Megalodon grips us the way it does. It sits at the perfect intersection of two powerful human feelings. It is real. This was a genuine animal that truly ruled our oceans. Not a dragon, not a myth, not a story someone invented around a fire. And yet, it is also just beyond our reach, vanished before we existed. Known only through fragments, impossible to ever fully see. It is a true monster that we missed by 3.5 million years. And that near miss, that sense of a real horror lurking just on the other side of time, is exactly what makes it unforgettable. When you next stand at the edge of the ocean and look out at that vast, dark, restless water, remember what once moved beneath waters just like these. Remember that for a span of time so long, it dwarfs the entire human story. The seas of this planet were ruled by a predator of almost unimaginable power. That whales the size of buses were prey, that a single bite could shatter bone, that an animal 60 feet long cruised these depths as the undisputed master of an entire world. And then remember this, the reason you can stand there safely, the reason you can wade into that water without a shadow rising beneath you, is that the great king is gone. The world changed. The warmth retreated, the prey grew scarce, the rivals rose, and the monster faded into the stone, leaving behind only its teeth and a silence that has lasted for millions of years. The ocean remembers, in its own way. Every so often, a storm churns up the seabed, and a fossilized tooth the size of a human hand washes up onto a beach somewhere in the world. A child picks it up, turns it over, feels the weight of it, runs a thumb along the ancient serrated edge. And for just a moment, holding that single tooth, they are touching the largest predator that ever swam a ghost from a lost warm world, reaching across millions of years to remind us of a time when we were not the most fearsome thing on this planet. Not even close. Megalodon is gone. But the question of what it was and what its survival would have meant still has the power to send a chill down the spine of anyone who dares to imagine it. Because deep down, we all know the truth. If that shadow had never disappeared from the water, if the great king had never fallen, the ocean would belong to it. And we would never dare to enter. #outro and call to action. The ocean still holds secrets. We've explored only a fraction of the deep, and every year we uncover creatures and fossils that rewrite what we thought we knew about the ancient world. Megalodon is just the beginning. The prehistoric seas were filled with monsters just as strange, just as terrifying, and just as real creatures that make even Megalodon look like they had company at the top. If this journey into the world of the ocean's greatest predator gave you chills, if it made you look at the water a little differently, then do one thing before you go. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because in our next investigation, we're diving even deeper into the lost worlds and forgotten monsters of Earth's prehistoric oceans, the ones that hunted long before Megalodon ever rose from the depths. You will not want to miss what's coming next. Until then, remember, the most terrifying monsters in history weren't invented. They were real, and some of them are only just now beginning to give up their secrets. Watch the water, and we'll see you in the deep.